Hello, everybody. Good to see you. I thought I might talk a little bit more on the unattuned speech. There's a lot to say, and specifically, I was thinking about the whole side of life that involves giving and receiving feedback. Feedback being kind of a general word for someone, giving some information about how the relationship is impacting them. We do that in our intimate relationships. We do that in our work relationships. And it's a pretty important part of life, and it's, in my experience, pretty difficult. There are all sorts of conflicts that come up in life, and we need to talk about them to work them out. But in the course of that, and one of the things that I like to keep in mind is that integrity has something to do with wholeness. It's being whole human beings, kind of grounded and centered in what's true, what's real in us. And sometimes people talk about the shadow. They talk about the fact that human beings don't always see all aspects of themselves. There are actually elements of each of us that we're blind to. We may have a story made up about something that isn't actually true. We may not want to see what our real motivations are. There may be behavior we're pretty unconscious about. This being human is quite multifaceted, and we don't always see ourselves clearly. We don't always see what's required clearly. So, in this sort of context where we hide things from others, of course, there's that, where we don't want other people to see the truth of what's going on. And then there's when we even hide it from ourselves. It's always going on in human beings. So, often these sorts of situations of conflict and where people are giving each other feedback they're interesting because they are the moment when there's an opportunity to wake up a bit about oneself. Oddly, we don't really relish that opportunity often. There's a lot of resistance to it. We want to see ourselves the way we want to see ourselves. So when someone is, giving us some sort of feedback, it's very easy to become defensive. It's very easy to become hurt and defensive. I say this from personal history. And so one of the things I think that's key to integrity is to develop this embodied presence in oneself that could possibly notice that defensiveness is happening. Okay, if you don't notice that it's happening, you're just kind of off to the races and it just kind of runs itself. But if there's a moment where you see, oh, I'm getting defensive, there's a choice there. There might be a choice to not do that, to not go down that road, to avoid the reactivity that so oftentimes involves hearing, your impact on someone else. But people aren't very skilled often at doing that. They often blurt it out in anger and in judgment. That's hard to receive. One of the things that's hard to receive, I think, is, sometimes you feel misperceived. And attacked, judged, condemned. And that brings out our shame so strongly. So one of the little things that I learned late in life, and I'm not sure I'm so good at it still, but I've practiced it for quite a few years, is just this sense that when someone wants to say something critical of me, that I really stay present with myself, with what's going on inside myself. As I said, notice if defensiveness is happening, and just kind of make clear in an interior way, right now, this is about them. Right now, they're revealing themselves to me. It's really an interesting frame of reference to put around somebody criticizing you, because what we tend to do is immediately, if somebody's criticizing you, we go to where it's about us. And then we feel like, is that right or wrong? Do I feel, that's not perceiving me the way I perceive. I need to defend myself. There's all of this. So it's a powerful thing to just insert that moment of, this is about them. I'll figure out later what I really want to own here about this criticism. Right now, this is about them. It's about them telling me about some sort of pain that's in them, whether I'm producing it, I've caused it, whether I'm just the occasion of it. It seems to them like it's my fault, but if you just step back and say, okay, this is about them right now. I want to listen. I want to listen and really understand. And you can even say that out loud. It kind of buys you. It buys you a certain kind of peace and keeps you from just like going off. It's like, I really want to understand what you're telling me about what you're experiencing. And to get curious about it. One of the things that's really hard is most people, when they're criticizing you, they aren't really telling you what's going on in them. They don't want it to be about them. They want it to be about you. What's wrong with you? They don't want it to be about them. It's part of their own defensiveness. So you kind of have to do that a little bit for them. Like, okay, this is about them. And so, reframing it a bit as being about pain. I was just talking to someone today and they found it so helpful. I just said, why don't you ask your son to tell you about his pain? What hurts? Tell me about what hurts. It's such a different thing than tell me what's wrong with me, And maybe not everybody's up for it. Maybe it'll only make them mad. But I honestly believe that each of us want other people to know and witness the places inside of us that hurt if we're actually ready to notice and witness them ourselves. And that's kind of a touchy thing. So, but some people are skilled at doing this, and it's still not easy to listen to. It's, when they're actually talking about the feelings and the impact something you had on them. It's not easy. There's just the temptation towards shame, which is actually where defensiveness comes from. It's really kind of very deep and powerful human emotion that comes out of our being social animals, that we're constantly attuned to what other people think of us and how they're affecting us, how we're affecting them. And there's this almost automatic impulse to feel shame if somebody is unhappy with you. So to have the presence to notice that, oh, this is uncomfortable. And maybe even to see this uncomfortable as it's kind of touching shame, like the sense there's something wrong with me. When actually it doesn't have to. You get to screw up, folks. It actually doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you if you do something and somebody else is unhappy with it. It doesn't mean there's something flawed in the core. We are all insensitive at times, insensitive to what we're doing that's impacting other people. We're always messing up. So that kind of goes along with integrity too. The permission to screw up. These moments, they touch this deep sense of, I'm unlovable. It's right in there. I haven't quite found a human being that I've ever worked with that doesn't have at least a little bit of this in themselves, if not a raging torrent of it. This sense of, I'm unlovable. And sometimes it has different flavors. There's the I'm not welcome version of it, or I don't belong version of it. It has different versions, but somewhere in there, every human being has this sort of place. And so if we kind of turn it around, if you're a sensitive human being, not everybody is, it seems, but if you're a sensitive human being, you often won't say how somebody's impacting you because you're worried you might hurt them. This is the hurt that we're perhaps worried about touching in other human beings. This place in whoever you're close to where they're afraid they're unlovable. They're unlovable, they're incompetent. I'm trying to think of all the different flavors of it. There's quite a few. They're all versions of shame. And so it often silences us. And we often, just don't say how other people are affecting us. So on the reverse, even though, receiving feedback takes a certain kind of skill, giving it takes a certain kind of skill too. In this context, I probably err on the side of not saying enough to people. I'd rather avoid it. I'm a bit avoidant when it comes to that, not mentioning if I'm hurt. Although I have to say, over the course of life, I've learned to do it more and more. It simply creates distance when you don't. It creates distance. There are problems down the line if you don't actually say what's up, especially in your closest relationships. You can get away with it a bit at work. Work has a different kind of boundary around it. Though even there, you need to say stuff. So I should say, as a personality, that sort of avoidant side of me is really very strong. Other people, feel a bit more entitled to, say when they're hurt or when something has inconvenienced them or isn't right by their standards. They feel much more entitled to do that. And so their skill to develop is not so much don't avoid, face it. I'm probably pretty nice in the sort of feedback I give. But the other side is to actually slow down and be nicer about the feedback you give, not so harsh. And sometimes, again, when you're the person giving the feedback, be very conscious if what you're actually laying on someone else is just your judgments about them. And judgments aren't necessarily revealing the whole of what's going on. Oftentimes they bury a feeling inside, a vulnerability. And rather than be vulnerable, we'll want to judge people. And more, I'm seeing the damage of this, the damage of labels, the way we label things. And the way, particularly in politics now, labeling is almost held like a virtue, to kind of slam someone or, and the sort of fundraising things that come into my email are always trying to create a picture in my mind of the other and how bad they are, with all sorts of very emotionally laden labels. It's all quite manipulative. And it's just becoming more and more conscious in me of how labels can cover up what's going on, who someone really is, and how bad it feels to be labeled. I remember once I went to a talk over in East Hampton, and someone I really wanted to hear was coming. His name is Lama Rod. He's a Black American, but he did a tremendous amount of Tibetan practice. He did one of those 3 years, 3 months, 3 days retreats. And he became a Lama. He's a teacher. And so I went to hear him talk. And I remember on the way, I was feeling a little bit of trepidation because I was afraid that what he would say is that American Buddhism is racist. And I've certainly heard other people say that there's this whiteness about it, and that the teachers, often white, don't talk in ways that people of color can relate to. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Yet it hurt to think, okay, I'm going to go to this talk and that's what I'm going to hear. Because I love Buddhism and I love the version of it that I received, which was from white Westerners for the most part. I've done some study in Asia. I've had some Asian teachers. But anyway, I wanted to hear what he had to say. And so I was completely disarmed by him. Because one of the first things that he said is that I consider labels to be a form of violence. And I'm just not here to label anybody anymore. And so that actually wasn't his purpose. That wasn't what his talk was about. And oddly, I can't remember what his talk was about, actually. I was so struck by the opening that just disarmed me. It's like I relaxed and, okay, I'm safe here. Nobody's going to slap a label on something that's dear to me. And I was really open to what he had to say. So, and I think some of what he said was critical in a discerning sense, not in a condemning sense about the things that are going on and the unskillfulness. We need to say these things. We need to point them out. But there's a different kind of energy, that goes with that energy of labeling. So I've just become very conscious of that. And so oftentimes when we're giving people feedback, we're just sharing our judgments of them, our aversion toward them. We're sharing that with them. And that doesn't feel very good to receive, So, and those judgments are really faux feelings. There's actually something that they're hiding. When they have this saying, when you're pointing the finger at someone else, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. Sometimes it's a matter of projection. Sometimes you're projecting on somebody else something that's true of you. So that's a possibility. Another is just that you're hiding your vulnerability. You don't want to say this hurt. And this hurt me because this is where it goes inside of me when you say something like that, or when you do something like that, or you don't do something that I thought you were going to do, or that I asked you to do. This is kind of what happens inside of me, and this is where it goes. That actually makes people understand you. That helps them to know you. It actually is a signal to come closer. If you can at all say, hey, I'm in pain, people come closer. It's our instinct. It's our instinct to help people in pain, even when it's something relative to what we've done. And that's part of the skill of doing that, is to talk on that level, And it's often the aspect of white Buddhism that I think I've been most touched by is when people have been willing to tell me about how it hurts to feel excluded, to feel like you don't belong, to feel like you're invisible in a group. It's like, I know those feelings. I'm a human being. And the fact that a situation would lead me to feel that way, it's of concern to me. That immediately kind of begins to draw me closer. There's a formula, that I learned somewhere back when. I don't even remember who to credit the formula with, a feedback formula, which was I feel blank because of when you do blank. Okay, actually, I forgot. So when you do blank, so it describes a particular observable behavior. I feel blank because blank. And what I request that you do is blank. So there's like 4 parts to it that you can think about before you actually approach somebody. What is it that they're actually doing? Because sometimes we're obscure about what's the actual behavioral thing that is tipping us off in some way. We don't know. We're just having this reactivity. We don't know. So that's already a bit of our homework. Then what's the actual feeling? And if you're saying, I feel that you only think of yourself, that's not a feeling, folks. That's a judgment. That's hiding your feeling. What is it you're actually feeling in the presence of someone else? Unnoticed. That's a little bit of a judgment that they're not noticing you. But it's getting closer to the feeling, kind of left out, ignored. I want contact, something like that. And that's what you have to kind of explain the feeling. You have to reveal yourself to somebody. The more you reveal yourself to someone, the more likely things are going to go better. And then it really helps too to have a request in mind. What is it you want the person to do or change? And it's okay if you just want them to know. I just want you to know how I feel. It's okay to say, I don't want you to fix it. Sometimes when people, I got to fix this, you feel, like they haven't really taken it in. So that's a formula I learned way back when that I sometimes think about, find helpful. The other thing that I've also learned is to always tell people all different sides of you with respect to an issue. So to give an example, rather than come in, you have to say you have a complaint about somebody who, ignored a need of yours. And so sometimes though, you can also say, I appreciate this. Or a part of me doesn't really want to tell you this because it's telling me that it's kind of trivial and it might make you feel bad. And maybe it'd be better to keep it silent. So you're transparent about that. Actually, this is a side of you that you're bringing to the conversation and you're actually owning it. And it's saying you're concerned about the other person's reaction and you don't want it to hurt. And that might be a reason to stay silent. But then you say, then I really feel like it would cause distance if that happened. And so I want to say that anyway, you can own different sides of it. You can also say what you're grateful another person has done. Because honestly, sometimes these super helpful people can drive you nuts, if you know what I mean. And so often they're so helpful, they're doing so much for you that it's very hard to say, but you're stepping all over my boundaries, in this way or that way. So it's helpful, at least it helps to give, express, I'm grateful that you do these things. However, when you do this, I feel this because this, that kind of thing is really helpful in giving feedback. Now, I want to just take a moment to bring this back to our themes, just integrity. And reiterate that integrity, there's a felt sense to it. It might sound like a lot of intellectual content, what I've talked about in terms of giving feedback. And I've given you some tools, so to speak. But it comes back to the the whole piece about integrity, whether to talk or not, for example, whether you need to share something or not, it's like you really have to check in with yourself. There's a felt sense. And it's really on a feeling level that you're going to feel if something is creating distance with another human being. That's a felt thing. So oftentimes integrity involves that, like honoring the body. And you'll know in a certain feedback loop when you've honored it in what you said by the feeling afterwards. Feeling afterwards. Sometimes there's relief. Sometimes there's a kind of if you're avoidant type like me, there's a little bit of pride, wholesome pride, I would say, that you had the courage to like bring something up. That feels good. There's even sometimes when people don't take it well and they kind of spin off. I notice that if I'm really in my integrity, it doesn't necessarily throw me off of balance. And I can actually be present for them. If I'm really in this sort of embodied core, I can be there for them. And I know that's hard for sensitive human beings to have somebody have a reaction. But frequently that reaction is, they're going into shame. They're doing the shame cycle, which is feel shame, don't notice the shame, maybe attack back or whatever. You go into that. And if you're present enough with just, this is suffering. I love that phrase. It comes right out of the suttas from the Buddha. Idam dukkam. This is suffering. It has a power to just like cut through one's perceptions when you're with another human being, when you're with yourself, to notice this is suffering. This is hard. It's hard for them. Mercy. It's what it brings out, the sense of compassion. Like, this is suffering. So I believe I'll stop there. That's just my attempt to give articulation to this really important part of our human life and our speaking to each other.